Is it still worth starting a business in the UAE in 2026, or is the market already slowing down? Flight disruptions are affecting mobility, tourism-dependent sectors are already under pressure, banks are no longer opening accounts based on basic compliance, investors are taking longer to make decisions. Today the risk is not opening a company, the risk is opening it incorrectly. In this video I will explain how to set up a business in the UAE correctly, the most common and costly mistakes founders make and how to avoid them. Many founders choose to go through this process with VisaTop to reduce risk and avoid costly mistakes. The UAE is not losing its position, but the nature of growth is shifting. The economy is still expanding at roughly 4.5 to 5% in 2026, with more than 70% of GDP coming from non-oil sectors. This means the country is no longer dependent on oil cycles. It's driven by services, logistics, finance and international business. Previously, Dubai operated as a rapid entry market. Businesses could enter quickly, test models and adjust structure later. Now the sequence is reversing. Structure is being evaluated before growth. You can see this in three areas. First, banking behavior. Accounts are no longer opened based on formal compliance alone. Banks are evaluating the logic of the business model much earlier. Second, investor behavior. Capital is still present, but decision cycles are longer. Investors are prioritizing clarity over speed. Third, operational sustainability. Businesses that depend on unstable external factors, travel, tourism, short-term demand, are becoming more sensitive to fluctuations. At the same time, not all sectors are slowing down. Strong performance is still seen in B2B services, logistics and supply chain, digital and remote-first businesses. These sectors are less dependent on physical movement and are more stable in the current environment. Now businesses under the most pressure are tourism-dependent models, short-term service businesses, reselling without differentiation. These models rely on constant flow. When that flow slows down, margins disappear. There is also a broader shift happening. Dubai has long been seen as a safe haven for capital. In 2026, this perception is being tested, not because the system is weak, but because external risks are more visible. At the same time, there is no capital flight. What is happening is risk recalibration. This creates a clear conclusion. Dubai is still a strong market, but it's no longer forgiving. In practice, most problems come down to a few key mistakes. The first is choosing the wrong business activity. The second is setting up a structure that doesn't match how the business operates. And the third is not thinking about banking from the beginning. These mistakes don't stop the setup, but they stop the business later. In addition to this, there are other mistakes that don't appear immediately. One of them is compliance. Many founders underestimate how much information needs to be clearly presented about the business model, transactions, and structure. If this is unclear or incomplete, approvals can be delayed or rejected. Another issue is economic substance. Some business structures require a real presence in the UAE, including operational activity, local expenses, or physical setup. Ignoring this can lead to regulatory issues and affect tax positioning. There are also cases where companies are set up in the wrong jurisdiction. For example, choosing a free zone structure for a business that is planning to operate within the UAE market. This creates limitations that only become visible later. And finally, operational compliance. Hiring without proper structure or running activity outside of the licensed scope can lead to penalties and restrictions. These are not isolated mistakes. They are all part of the same problem: incorrect structure. Let's break this down step by step. The process begins with defining business activity through investing in Dubai and alignment with Ministry of Economy and Tourism. This is where the first structural error occurs. Activities are selected based on approximation. The founder describes the business in general terms. The system requires exact classification. This gap creates inconsistency, and inconsistency is what the system reacts to later, particularly in banking. At this stage, the key question is: how do you earn money and how will that look in transactions? In many UAE-based businesses, payments come from multiple countries, currencies vary, revenue structure is not local only. If the activity does not reflect this, the business becomes difficult to operate. This is where VisaTop typically gets involved early, structuring the activity based on real revenue logic and not description. Because correcting this later is possible, but more expensive and time-consuming. This is where the second mistake becomes visible. Once the activity is selected, it defines the license through Department of Economy and Tourism. The license tells the system what your business is, and more importantly, what it is not. The mistake at this stage is selecting a license that is technically valid, but not structurally accurate. This creates a gap between declared activity and actual operations. This gap becomes visible in one critical place: banking. Because banks evaluate whether your activity explains your revenue. If the logic does not match, the structure is considered high risk. VisaTop addresses this by aligning the license with the real business model, not the easiest available option. This is another common mistake: choosing the wrong structure. Free zone versus mainland. The decision is often reduced to pricing. This is incorrect. The correct variable is operational flow: where clients are located, how revenue is received, where contracts are executed. One of the biggest misconceptions in the UAE market is the idea of cheap setup. A low-cost setup often means limited visa quotas, restricted flexibility, and in many cases complications with banking. The issue is not the price, but what that structure allows you to do after. When this is not aligned, the company becomes inefficient. Not legally incorrect, but operationally restricted. This is one of the most expensive mistakes because it's discovered only after the business starts functioning. Trade name registration through Invest in Dubai is often treated as a minor step. In reality, it reflects whether the founder understands the system. A compliant name matches activity, follows regulation, and fits structure. Rejections at this stage are not critical, but they indicate lack of alignment. As the process continues, the founder interacts with systems such as Ministry of Human Resources and Emiratisation. This is where the process becomes interconnected. Data must align across systems. There is no tolerance for inconsistency, and this is where most delays occur. Not because of complexity, but because of lack of pressures. VisaTop typically manages this layer by synchronizing all data points across systems before submission. Access is managed through UAE Pass. Basically, it's the entry point. One of the most common mistakes at this stage is underestimating how critical UAE Pass actually is. For example, founders delay setting it up or don't complete full verification. As a result, they cannot access government platforms, they cannot sign documents digitally, and parts of the setup process simply stop. Another issue appears when UAE Pass is not properly linked to the correct Emirates ID or company records. This creates mismatches across systems, and once that happens, approvals get delayed or require manual correction. In practice, UAE Pass setup needs to be completed correctly from the beginning as a part of the overall structure. Also, the medical test required for residency visas. This includes a standard health screening and biometric registration. It's a routine process, but delays can happen if appointments or documents are not handled properly. Since residency status is often required for banking or operations, this step directly affects how quickly the business can start. The very critical stage is banking. Banks look at three things: what you do, how you get paid, and whether those payments match your activity. If this doesn't align, the account is delayed or rejected. Most common mistakes: wrong activity, doesn't match real work, unclear payment structure, different countries, no clear logic, applying for a bank account after setup without planning. The result: the company exists but cannot operate. Which banks are reliable for business in 2026? Digital, faster but still checking. Bank, easiest entry point, good for small medium businesses. MISREAD Biz, similar, slightly stricter. Traditional, slower but stronger. Emirates and BD, one of the most reliable but strict. ADCB, balanced and stable. RegBank, more flexible for SMEs. Another misconception is cost. The market is often presented as low entry. That is only partially true. Entry cost is low, operational cost is not. There is also another layer many founders ignore: taxation. Companies must align with requirements from Federal Tax Authority. This includes corporate tax, VAT, if applicable, reporting obligations. If this is not considered early, it creates additional pressure later. In 2026, the system reacts faster, banks evaluate deeper, investors wait longer. If your structure is wrong, bank accounts don't open, payments get questioned, operations slow down or stop. Because in this market, structure directly affects your ability to receive and move money. Before, you could fix this later. Now the system forces you to get it right from the beginning. The UAE is not a difficult market, it's a structured one, and it rewards clarity. Getting the structure right from the beginning requires a clear understanding of how the system works in practice. And here VisaTop.com helps and provides support 24/7.
VisaTop.com